So my name's Jonathan Baier, as Redbeard introduced me. I'm a senior cloud architect for Cloud Technology Partners. We're a cloud-focused professional services firm, focusing mostly on the enterprise-level organizations. I also do a little bit of blogging for them around containerization and a few other topics. And as you can see up there, I'm publishing a book. It'll be out later this month. I'll have a coupon code at the end for that if you can stick around. So what I want to talk about today is just some of the things we've seen helping companies adapt new technology or adopt new technology. So whether that be cloud or now containers, just going into organizations, we go in there, we help them plan out a strategy, start their journey to the cloud, and really help them understand the challenges and the pitfalls that come with that. But it's more than that. I mean, it touches all areas of the enterprise. And it's really a people thing as much as it is a technology thing. And it's also about the business as well. So it's very important when we go into these places for us to understand what their business is at a deep level so we can understand the goals they're trying to achieve and help them use the technology to achieve that end. So what do we find when we go in there? And I swear I didn't coordinate this with Loris, the slide on the cables. But we see all kinds of things. And to be honest, it's every large organization is going to have some skeletons in the closet. They're going to have some legacy systems where things are not all nice and neat like you would like them to be, right? And that's part of the challenge, helping them adapt that, helping them evolve that. But I think the important thing to remember is that even that legacy technology, at some point, it was the new hot technology that everybody was going to. It was going to change, make their business more efficient, change the development cycles. So everything over time can become a legacy mess without the proper care. And containers are really no different from that, right? So back in the day, that Tomcat application that you wrote in development and you hard-coded some IP addresses in it, and it's okay, it's only in development. Until it wasn't just in development, right? 5 years later, it's out in production. Maybe it's not hard-coded IPs. Maybe you've got other legacy artifacts, other pieces of cruft, as the gentleman said earlier, that are kind of baked in there. And later on, when you're trying to move this to a new platform or move to a new technology, it can be difficult to sort through that and pick all of that out. So I think that's the thing that I'd like to put out there is just to, when the new technology comes out, to keep that in mind, to keep in mind building a plan out, right? And trying to avoid building a mob, moving more towards the trained army side. So how do we do that? I think a lot of you here, you're probably asking yourself the question, how do we take our containers out of R&D? How do we get them into production? And that's a noble question. It's a question you should be asking. But I'd like to suggest maybe a slightly different question or a second question that should be almost the same level of priority, which is, how do we not build that mob, right? How do we approach this with the right care and organization so that what we build is extensible and usable throughout the life cycle of embracing this new technology? So, what are some of the things we can do? There's a couple of things, right? So first off is just having the right mental models, the right tools with the right abstractions so that we're not adding unnecessary complexity. We can keep it simple, keep it easy to manage, and really just be able to think about what matters to us and not necessarily all the details of the technology underlying that. The second thing is, building a picture, so building a roadmap, really, a strategy and a roadmap to let you know where you're going, but also let you know where the gaps are, right? This is very early. Not everything has been solved, as we've heard several of the speakers say. having that roadmap, having that strategy helps you kind of understand where do I have things that I can rely on, where are things solid, and where's the footing not so solid, where are there still gaps and things that need to be fine-tuned or solutions need to be built for. And that can really help you understand not only what to build today, but it gives you the ability to plan for what you're going to build tomorrow. And then, of course, the community. I think there's a tremendously strong community around Kubernetes and Tectonic, CoreOS. There's a lot of people out there who have lessons learned. You've seen some of them at the conference this week, and there's a lot we can learn from them. And beyond that, there are vendors and there are partners out there in the ecosystem who have experience either helping companies with those enterprise-specific features, those enterprise-level items, and also have experience helping companies adopt the new technology. So this is an excerpt from my book. This is really meant to be a very general slide. This is not all-encompassing. Typically, if we go into an engagement and we're helping companies plan it out, we'll do detailed reference architectures and even building some for containers. But my point in showing this is just to give you an idea of what a simple picture might look like. If you're trying to build out that picture, here's some of the big signposts, some big check boxes to check off, and it helps you start building that picture. You can evolve this and change it over time, but it gives you the ability to start planning and start thinking about, okay, I know what I have, I know what's solid here, and then there's a couple of boxes here where I'm not so sure. I don't really like what's out in the marketplace. It doesn't really fit my business needs. So going back to that idea of a mental model, right? A good mental model. I think Kubernetes is certainly not the only cluster management source project out there, but I think it has several areas where it shines. And one of those areas that I've always liked is just the simplicity of some of the abstractions and the models that are contained within it. So just the core constructs of services, replication controllers, and pods, they give you a good way of thinking about your application and letting you think about resiliency and redundancy in a way that is more around in terms of your applications and your services, and not about the individual containers as much. So I think a great example is within the pod. I can have a pod, I can have applications within that pod talking to each other. I can share data there. So it's really application-centric in that way. And I'm not worrying about, oh, is this container over here near this one? Or how do I wire these together? So it's a good baseline, right? And it's not the whole picture, but this is a foundation which you build on. So you have a good, simple foundation. It doesn't make things overly complex, and isn't overly opinionated about a lot of things, so that's a good foundation for you to start with. And then Tectonic, I think, is a great example of building on that next layer, right? So we have the foundation, now we're going to fill in some of the walls of the house. They've added that fully supported model, which is really important to help along the way and on the journey to adopting the new technology. But there's also a lot of pieces around security, which is a very important piece for the enterprises. The elegant kind of patching and updates mechanism is hugely important in avoiding those messes down the line. I think I'm not sure who said it, but someone earlier yesterday said they used to spend 70% of their time just with operating system updates. It's a huge burden on your operations. And if you can get rid of that, then it allows you to more easily manage things, but focus on things that are more important and focus on evolving your platform. And they have a number of other features around security we've heard about this week: the SSO, the Quay Enterprise, which is secured. It does the vulnerability scanning. These are big check boxes. If you're not familiar with working with the enterprises, working with their security teams, compliance teams, vulnerability scanning comes up all the time. SSO is a big piece, and that is really another piece where it can be a huge time drain for the operations and the security team. And and then finally, another piece which maybe wasn't highlighted as much this week, but just that slim footprint of the CoreOS, giving you better resource utilization, better cost optimization. Again, that I think really, when you have that level of that ability to optimize and get better utilization, also frees up some time on the operations side. So beyond that, we have the partner ecosystem. We've heard from a couple of these companies this week. This is really just a few, and mostly the ones that were present here. We have everything from the companies like Packet doing API-driven bare metal. Sysdig showed us those great, really introspective monitoring that's container-aware and Kubernetes-aware. Cluster HQ and Project Calico and Diaz. So, these are great starts, and they do fill in some of those gaps. They do check off some of those boxes. It's not the complete story, but I do think 2016, you're going to see continued growth here and probably pretty large growth here to hit a lot of those major check boxes and fill out that partner ecosystem. And then the other thing we heard a lot about this week is companies actually using containers in production. So we had some great talks from Verizon and Viacom talking about how they're building out their next generation infrastructure using containers and Kubernetes. Companies like Spotify and SoundCloud who are using containers to continue that edge and scale. And then I think one of the what I found one of the more interesting talks was some of the ones around financial services, where we're actually seeing companies like Goldman Sachs and Bank of America using containers, using them even in production, and embracing this technology early on instead of waiting later on in the cycle. So getting in there early, but starting to build that plan around it. So, just to kind of sum it up, I think everybody here knows containers are here to stay. I'm kind of preaching to the choir on that one. It's going to be a part of your portfolio. It's going to be there in some fashion. So the question is, how is that going to look? And right now we have that opportunity when we're adopting this new technology. Yes, go out, adopt it. But let's make some good choices, and let's build a roadmap, build a strategy around how we're going to deploy this in our organization. I think the gentleman from ISE said, technology was not the problem. That's not going to stop you. It's the organization that's going to stop you. And also the gentleman from Viacom said culture shock is a barrier to production. And that rings so true for me. If you have a new technology, even if you've got leadership buy-in from it, getting the rest of the organization to buy into it can be really difficult because they've had to deal with the mess of, the picture up there on the right. So they've had to deal with that. They have those twitches, from the pain of operating legacy technology where maybe some bad habits crept in or some seemingly innocent decisions without that guiding plan, ended up being an operational nightmare. So, this is an opportunity, I think, to start making those choices, build out that strategy that will help you go forward in a much more stable position and build out something that's going to last, right? And again, there's a strong community out there you can rely on. There's a lot of partners that have worked with this technology, that have experience. They've worked with other technology adoption cycles. So there's a lot of help that you can get. So my final question to you is, what are you going to build next for your company? A mob or a trained army? The choice is yours. Thanks. A few discount codes if anybody wants to buy the book. Do we want to do questions?
Yeah, let's do some questions. Anyone at all?
I think people want their drinks.
Well, yeah, people do want drinks. But that being said, I like a lot of the things that you're touching on here. Both in pointing out how some of the pieces fit together, but also in specifically calling out some of the persistent gaps. Now, I know that people still, they like to harp on the things like, how do I run my MySQL database? And we've gotten some answers to that. And how do I, carry files across the file system? What do you think are some of the more vague or underrepresented concerns for taking, the applications of a historic enterprise and bringing them into the second decade of the 21st century?
Yeah, so, I think on the panel, they talked about a number of the gaps. What I think is the most nebulous, which is probably quite germane to Tectonic Conference, is security, because security is something that kind of gets thrown out there. I see people say like networking, persistent storage, security. Well, networking, that's kind of broad, but I've heard actually specific things called out. Persistent storage, that's a little bit more definable. Security is a broad topic. There's a lot of compliance pieces. There's a lot of areas. We're seeing growth there. We're seeing things being checked off as far as getting capabilities there. But I think until there's a better understanding of how security in containers works, how is it different, how is it the same, we're not really going to completely fill in all of those boxes until there's more of a, I guess, an increase in the knowledge for that. So, defining those problems more specifically.
And speaking of that, historically, security teams, they very much engender a culture of no. They say, we don't understand this, so you can't do it. We run into that, with CoreOS a lot as well in trying to explain some of these new paradigms. What do you think are some of the best ways to help operations folks guide the security teams into having a better understanding about these paradigms?
Yeah, I think it's not unlike what we do when we come into a company. A big part of it is understand their business, meaning understand what it is that is their pain points, what it is that's sort of caused those knee-jerk reactions. So something that I think could be helpful is, for example, the Quay vulnerability scanning feature is something that I think a lot of security people would be thrilled about. And it's not something that maybe an operations person might not be obvious to them that that's a big checkbox, but it is. Being able to do vulnerability scanning is a big part of the program that they're putting together. It's one part of a lot of other things, but if you take that time to sort of understand where they come from, and I think that's not that much different from what we've talked about in the DevOps world, where we bridge the gap between developers and operations. So.
Case in point in that, I think that one of the conversations that I have repeatedly with these security teams is things like, you need to enable password aging on the server. And it's been interesting because I've learned that the security teams are not necessarily used to being challenged on that. And when I come to them and go, why? Why do you need password aging installed when we don't, by default, use any passwords? And folks go, well, my checkbox says I have to do this. Right. And when you actually tease out that question of why do you enable secure, password aging in the first place? Well, the reason why you do that is to guarantee that the same password doesn't get used over time. It's not because it's just something that you do. It's to help enforce an operational practice to increase security. But at the same time, if you can have the operational practice of not using passwords when you log into systems, you get an even more advanced benefit of that. And I think that that's just one small example that we can use to take forth and really question some of the almost cargo cult mentality that we've had about some of these things going into the future.
Well, yeah, and I would say get the security team involved early when you're building your plan, right? So that they're part of the process instead of, okay, I built this plan and operations and development's on board, and oh, by the way, security guys, we're doing this, so I hope you can make it fit in your world. If you get them in early in the conversation and include them, I think you get a lot better results and probably better understanding of, okay, now I see what you're doing here. I see how the password agent isn't maybe as relevant in this case, and we have maybe a compensating control for that.
Now, building out even further, we're continuing to weave through these ideas of storage and networking and security. What do you think you could suggest to companies who are much more of the consumers of off-the-shelf technology, be that both off-the-shelf open source and off-the-shelf commercial entity or commercial software, where they want to utilize this technology, but there's still that gap where things aren't quite ready for it?
Yeah, I think by and large, enterprises do tend to gravitate towards at least some off-the-shelf tools and software. But yeah, so I think there is a pretty rich community, I think, an ecosystem that's already started there. I think there's a lot you can draw on that's out there. And like I said, 2016, if you thought 2015 was fast development, I think you're really going to be blown away by the things that happen over the next year.
Excellent. Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay.
Hi.
Jonathan Baier, thank you very, very
Thanks,
much.
everybody.